Amen. We got a treat today. John Loring, who will be serving on the board. And by the way, if you ever serve on the board, it's not like you have to preach each week when you're elected to serve on the board. But John Loring is going to be sharing a message today. John and his wife Amy are currently in the process of plans to plant a church in the Traverse City area, which is really cool that they're going to be looking at doing over the next year and a half, 2 years. And John helps lead one of the small groups in the church, the 40 small group, and is involved in other kinds of ways. But would you welcome John and give him your attention?
All right. Thanks, Jesse. Good morning. Let me get my stuff here. Make a running bet on the fact of how soon I will probably cry. So, just let you, that's why the tissues are here. Hang on 1 second. So, most of you know me pretty well, I think. I'm a social worker, and I've been a social worker for the past 20 years, and for the past 15 years, have worked with individuals that are chronically homeless in the community, especially in Washtenaw County. I work with the teams specifically that are designed to engage, treat, and then transition those individuals. And I wanted to start this morning to tell you a story about a friend of mine named Georgia. So I met Georgia probably about 2002, and we worked for a long time. I was her case manager for the longest time. And Georgia was homeless in Ann Arbor. She would spend most of her time in a shopping cart, a lot of her box items loaded in the shopping cart. She was a bit difficult for people to have to deal with at times. She was known for kind of getting all of her stuff spread out everywhere, all over the place. There's one of those fancy shops in downtown Ann Arbor called Falling Water. One summer, she decided to unpack all of her belongings, including the boxes, behind the store, which shut down the power to the entire store, caused the air conditioning system to overheat. And of course, the police called, and they called me, and I went out to go see her and talk to her. And so I worked with Georgia a long time. And for about 5 years, the extent of our conversation was her to tell me to F off. Literally. I would walk up and go see her every single time. I'd see her walking down the street, and I would say to her, "Good morning, Georgia. How are you? Can I get you a cup of coffee?" And she would give me the finger and tell me to F off. That was the entire conversation for 5 years. And I kept talking to her. Every single day, I'd walk up and go find her. And one day, we hired some new staff. And I'm like trying to be a good example of how to outreach to people. And so I'm bringing out a new nurse with us. And I'm walking along, and I'm saying, "Hey, George," I said, "Carol, let's go meet, there's Georgia. Let's go meet Georgia." Georgia's pushing a shopping cart down the street. I'm like, "Come on, let's go meet her." We walk up to her and say, "Hey, Georgia, this is Carol." And she looks around, and she tells us to F off. And then I'm like, "Georgia, that's not very nice. She's a new nurse. She just got started." She whips around and gives me the finger again. For 5 years, this is the entire extent of our conversation. For 5 years. And then one morning, one night, probably about 2005, I was living here in Milan, and I had a dream. And I wanted to share that dream with you about Georgia. I had a dream that I was walking in downtown Ann Arbor, going up by Liberty, towards Liberty Plaza, which is in downtown. Maybe some of you know where that is. In the middle of Liberty Plaza there was this very ornate, very looking like statue that looked like modern art. You know, it was very cubic, different kind of features to it and stuff like that. And I looked at it when I was with some friends with us. We're standing there, and I looked at it. I couldn't see what it was or anything else like that. And so we're all kind of talking about, what is that statue? What do you think that is? And then over across the street in my dream, on the other side of the street, was Georgia. And she was sitting there with this huge drafting table and just sketching, just drawing and sketching. And she was looking up and then sketching and then drawing and stuff like that. So I left my friends across the street. I went over to the other side of the street, and I walked up behind her to look at what she was drawing, and I could see what she was drawing was a picture of a woman standing there with children gathered around her feet. And I looked up from where she was drawing, and I looked at the statue in the middle of Liberty Plaza, and I saw the exact same thing of a woman standing there with children gathered around her feet. And I said to her, "Georgia, How do you see that? And then she said to me, you just have to see it from my perspective. And I woke up, went downstairs, got a glass of milk, went back to bed, went about the next day. And then one day I was walking down the street in Ann Arbor, and I was up by Liberty Plaza, and it just hit me. Something just registered in a certain way in regards to Georgia. I don't know if I did anything different. I don't think I changed my approach to her or whatever. Something just changed within me about it. And then it happened to be, shortly after that, Georgia ended up in the hospital. She ended up at University of Michigan, and I received a phone call from her saying, can you come and see me in the hospital? And I was like, sure, I'll come up and see you. And then she pulls out $2,600 in makeshift underwear that she had stored on herself. She gives me the $2,600 and asks me to go get her a hotel room. So I go and do that. And then later from there, from a whole set of different chain of events, I get Social Security, this is a miracle in itself, to leave their office, come down, complete a Social Security application, and get her benefits started. So just getting the feds to do anything is a miracle. So they showed up and did that. And then it turned around that she ended up being housed in Avalon Housing and so on and so forth. And then she began to tell people, that's my grandson. You know? Our whole relationship changed. For 5 years, all I got from her was a finger and an FU. And then suddenly, it was something different. And I tell you that dream because I wanted to express to you that I think that dream prepared my heart for that phone call that day that she was going to call. It captures what I think we did best as a team about outreach and engagement. So outreach is the unconditional positive regard offered towards a stranger. And engagement is the process of relational discovery between two or more people. Outreach and engagement require meeting the individual where they are at, literally and figuratively, and where they are at mentally, emotionally, socially, culturally, and spiritually. As we as humans desire in life from others, at least some positive expression, a positive regard that meets us where we are and fosters some type of relational discovery. This is where a sense of belonging is realized. Yet this altruistic ideal doesn't always happen that way, or even as it's expected. In fact, it's often difficult, like when you're waiting in the parking lot for that space that somebody else decides to whip into. In fact, it's a growing expectation of conditional positive intent only if you greet me first, and relational mistrust that really you don't care that much, that leads to material competitiveness, social isolation, and fractured communities, all of which I've seen to be real within the experience of people who are struggling with homelessness. One aspect of the good news of Jesus is that he meets us where we're at individually and expresses unconditional positive regard to us personally and desiring to engage us in a relational discovery. More than that, he sends us out as his outreach team to do the same things to others, to expressing a positive, unconditional positive regard and engaging one another in the process of relational discovery. There's another story that I have that's a favorite story of mine about another woman that I think captures this. And it's in Mark 5:25 through 34. It's in, by the way, in your Bible, this word's going to be on the screen, but in your Bible it's on page 687, because I did look it up. Not that I know. And it reads like this. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years, she had spent everything she had to pay for them. And she had gotten no better. In fact, she's gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can only touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed from her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out of him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at the crowd pressing around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." So let's unpack this story for just a bit. In verse 25 through 26, we get a glimpse of this woman's history in regards to her suffering and the impact it's made on her life personally. A woman in the crowd had been suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors. Over the years, she had spent everything she had. It had gotten only but worse for her. The opening of the story identifies her as a woman and not as a girl. In Jewish culture, at age 12, a girl becomes a bat mitzvah, meaning a daughter of commandment, and has all the rights and responsibilities of a Jewish adult. But that doesn't imply that she is a woman in the full sense of the word yet. In fact, it's not until she's age 18 that she can marry, and age 20 that she can be employed. So since this text implies that she has spent everything she has on a cure, we can assume that this woman reached all those milestones in life. And while we do not know how old she is, there are implications that she had to have some different type of life experience before her hemorrhaging began. And thus, she's been suffering for a significant portion of her adult life, hemorrhaging for 12 years. In some ways, we can identify with this woman, since we all have had experiences in our lives that leave us feeling weakened and even a bit desperate. Like this woman, we will sometimes go to extremes, seeking help and relief. This text implies that she spent everything. But I think we can also imagine what it has cost her socially and spiritually. According to Leviticus 15, she is ceremonially unclean, as was anything she touched. So Leviticus 15, 25 through 27 reads, "If a woman has a flow of blood for many days that is unrelated to her menstrual period, or if that blood continues beyond the normal period, she is ceremonially unclean. As during her menstrual period, the woman will be unclean as long as the discharge continues. Any bed she lies on and any object that she sits on during that time will be unclean, just as during her normal menstrual period. If any of you touch these things, you will be ceremonially unclean. You must wash your clothes, bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening." She is ceremonially unclean, meaning she could not participate in her social and religious practices within her community. In fact, she created this same kind of ceremonial uncleanliness for others that she had any sort of contact with. I can imagine that nobody even wanted to be around her. She was an outcast within her own community. She had suffered greatly and spent everything. Desperate for a cure, she tried everything. The Talmud, the book of Jewish civil and ceremonial law, lists 11 cures for this type of ailment. Doctors would prescribe everything from tonics to lotions. Yet when these didn't work, there were also some pretty bizarre treatments. Carrying the ashes of an ostrich egg in linen rag in the winter, in the summertime, or a cotton rag in the winter, or carrying the barley corn found in the dung of a white female donkey. I'll wait for you. Are we grateful for the advancement of science? She may have experienced additional social isolations just due to her attempts to be whole. And out of all this, she's gotten worse. Nothing better at all. And it has cost her everything, financially, socially, emotionally, spiritually. She is ceremonially unclean. She is outside the acceptable boundary of her religion. I would imagine this has impacted her sense of purpose, identity, and hope. Yet we will see that even in her weakened state, socially isolated, desperate for a change, she takes a leap of faith and reaches out. She has suffered enough just to try about everything. Desperate, she seeks out Jesus. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Maybe this woman hasn't even heard him speak before. Maybe she's heard rumors. But those rumors sparked a sense of hope in her. From her place of suffering, maybe she wrestled with some difficult questions. Questions that we might have reflected on in our own lives. What's the purpose of all this? Should I really trust him or even his intention towards me? What if he doesn't respond? What if he does? and judges me for being this way. What if I did reach out? You know, by the way, and not that I'm implying in any way that I'm Jesus, but I wonder if Georgia had those similar questions before she made that phone call. Wrestling with these types of questions and others are where we all start out engaging with Jesus, filled with doubts, disbeliefs, and what ifs. Yet there's this inclination of maybe taking a risk, a leap of faith. For this woman and for us, a leap of faith is framed in the context of if I just. Notice she's not stating what if I, which would imply just another random attempt to find a remedy. No, she states in simple words of desperation, willing to risk it all. If I just touch his robe, I will be healed. And in that moment, she reaches out and touches his robe. The hem of his cloak, the fringe of his garment. It's evident in the scriptures that Jesus probably wore a tallit. This is not mine, by the way. This is Jesse's, so I'm being very careful with it. He probably wore a tallit, and each would have with tassels on each four corners. These would have been common for an Orthodox Jew in his day. Numbers 15 indicate that these tassels were to remind the wearer that they must obey all of God's commands and be holy before him. So she reaches out from her ceremonially unclean place and socially isolated place and touches these tassels, these symbols of God's command and holiness. And in that moment, she touches from outside the acceptable boundary, unsure of what was going to happen or how even Jesus was going to respond. Now she finds herself among the crowd, risking personal exposure, risking being wrong about Jesus, risking any last ounce of hope. And what happens? Immediately the bleeding stops and she can feel in her body that she has been healed from her terrible condition. And Jesus realized at once that the healing power had gone out of him. So he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" Immediately, in that very moment, she feels her body change, that she's healed from a terrible condition. The Greek word that Mark uses for healed could be defined as to make whole or to bring out one's salvation. It was not that she saved herself. Obviously, she's tried multiple things to make it all better. Instead, it was her willingness to take a risk on Jesus, to reach out beyond the acceptable boundary, that she finds wholeness and restoration. On a side note, for the image of this reminds me of her turning to Jesus and reaching out in him a leap of faith, captures what I believe it means to be a center-set church. Now, if you're new for the first time and you don't know what a center-set church means, you're welcome to talk to Jesse about it. It's called passing the buck. But for a center-set church, it's about taking a risk on Jesus and engaging him in the process of relational discovery. Imagine her surprise. It worked. What do I do now? Oh man, he spotted me. And Jesus knows that someone's touched him because he feels the healing power has gone out of him. Other translations indicate that Jesus perceives the power proceeding from him has gone forth. Jesus knows that he was touched. Not who brushed up against me, not who tapped me on the shoulder, not who pushed past everyone else to get to me. Who took a leap of faith and reached out and touched these tassels. Jesus knew the specifics. And the good news of this is that he seemed to know, or at least quickly understand, all of her needs, her history, her loss, her suffering, her hopes. Now, they're about to have a really profound moment, even more than what has already occurred. But so that we can see the importance of this being about a personal encounter with Jesus, Mark records the disciples rushed to judgment in answer to his question. His disciples said to him, "Look at the crowd pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me?" Clearly the disciples missed the point, as do we sometimes. I think the disciples' response reflect a bounded set perspective. Look at the people around you. What do you expect to happen if we don't set a boundary? But Jesus responds to the person far outside any boundary line, to the outcast. Who touched me? And he looks around to see her. His very personal response to seek her out. And they share a moment. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what has happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." Her response, frightened and trembling, Mark is writing about her sense of awe that has just occurred. It is not shame or guilt that brings her to his feet, but awestruck worship at the restorative power that she's just encountered. In that moment of risk, she finds wholeness and transformation, and she falls down before Jesus in worship. Yet there is more. She tells him all that she has done. She tells him the whole truth. We assume that this might be her confessing that she touched his tassels and what her intent was. But maybe there was more to it than that. Maybe this is where she started, but in the moment she confessed all of her needs to him, told him everything, opened her whole heart to him. Now she's worshiping and confessing her need before Jesus in the midst of the pressing crowd and the disciples. Still covered with her attempted remedies, still financially and socially and spiritually impoverished. She's engaging Jesus personally and publicly. This is not about his robe, the symbol of his religious good standing. It's about him and her finding each other. And Jesus expresses absolute, unconditional, positive regard towards this woman. He calls her daughter. Not woman, but daughter. He restores her identity. He accepts her as family. Not only has she been healed from her illness, but he has restored her sense of being, of belonging. Your faith has made you well. The Greek word for well here means, as defined as to save. It's the same word that we use for salvation. Jesus is stating that her risk of reaching out to touch him has opened the door to his saving power. So in that moment, he says, "Go in peace. Your suffering is over." This is a profound statement from Jesus, and not just some parting blessing. What's significant about this is what Leviticus 15 tells us about a woman who has dealt with such a condition as hers. Leviticus 15 and verse 28 says, "When the woman's bleeding stops, she must count off 7 days, and then she will be ceremonially unclean. On the 8th day, she must bring 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons and present them to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. Through this process, the priest will purify her before the Lord for the ceremonial impurity caused by her bleeding." Jesus gives no such instruction, even though he would have known it. Even though in other accounts of healing, he tells others to go and present themselves to the priest at the tabernacle. Not here. Jesus simply releases her to go in peace. This peace, in the language that Jesus probably would have spoken to her, is the word shalom. It is the ultimate expression of unconditional positive regard, that everything is all right. It is the full embrace of peace found in the most intimate relationship. It is a holistic peace meeting each of us where we are at, literally and figuratively. It is the peace at the heart of the good news of Jesus. It is the peace that I believe that many of us are longing to hear from him. Then he proclaims, "Your suffering is over." In other translations of this story, he states, "Be healed from your affliction." Now this is not Jesus re-healing her, but reaffirming that she is whole, not to listen to the lies that will bring doubt and disbelief. We don't know the initial cause of her hemorrhage, but we know that Jesus knew all of her needs, fears, shame, guilt, and wounds. Jesus was affirming that this was just not symptom relief, but restoration. And then her story ends. We don't know what happens to her life after this. What we do know is that she encountered Jesus. And through the manifestation of unconditional positive regard, they shared a moment of relational discovery. Now, before we wrap all this up, I want to share some really, really, really good news. Remember that Jesus perceived that the power proceeding from him had gone forth? This is the same power proceeding today. This was not a one-time release of something he was holding on to. She didn't pickpocket him. She reached out and touched eternity. This is the same experience for us today. To take a risk, to reach out beyond any perceived social, emotional, or even religious boundaries, and to experience the restorative power of Jesus. And here's what I confess to be truth. Jesus will meet you exactly where you are at. So a couple practical tips for you. And then we're going to try something for fun. Okay? What? The 40 members are laughing because they know what that means. Practical tips. 1, engage in the process of relational discovery with others following Jesus. Okay? Maybe coffee with a friend or a small group or some other events to attend. You'll discover that we're just as broken and as wounded as you perceive your own self to be. 2, think about a specific symptom or an issue and take a risk on Jesus. Tell him the whole truth and let him express shalom over your life. This could be confession to someone you trust, accountability for a struggle, getting a one-on-one prayer, or fasting for some breakthrough. Now, we're going to do a little exercise. If you'll notice in the back of your pews, there is a little thing that's a name tag. Everybody see a name tag? They're scattered throughout, by the way, because we didn't know how many people were to put them all at. So everybody grab 2 name tags. If you're sitting, now I might just put a little on this real quick, little clause. You don't have to do this. In no way whatsoever do you have to participate at all. I won't feel bad about it. It doesn't change your experience with Jesus. It doesn't change anything. You don't have, so don't feel any obligation to participate whatsoever. But if you choose to, there's your name tags. So you might have to reach around because we scattered them in various places. So take 2 name tags. And you'll notice it says, hello, my name is. I want you to write down in some ways in which you identify yourself due to an affliction or a struggle, something like this woman experienced. And then I want you to take that, and when you get a second, and not do it right now, just wait a second, just watch me. Now I want you to take that name tag. So, for example, in a struggle, an issue that I deal with on a regular basis is hostile. I'm a pretty hostile person at times towards people that I don't know. Sometimes, unfortunately, to my own family. I'm a hostile individual. I struggle with this level of hostility. It's something I deal with on an ongoing basis. I pray about on an ongoing basis. So I could say, hello, my name is hostile. Okay? So that's one. Then what you're going to do, after you identify that specific issue or symptom, I want you to think of the exact opposite of what that is. And I want you to identify that to be what Jesus desires to do in you. The work, the restoration, the healing that he desires to bring. And so for me, I wrote down, hello, my name is peaceful. That this is who I am in Christ. That this is who I am. So I'm going to take this sticker and I'm going to place it over that one. Just like that. So we're going to play a song for you. It's about 3 minutes for you to sit there. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. This is an upbeat song, so it's going to feel kind of a little weird. It's a celebratory song because I'm celebrating the fact that with Jesus I am peaceful. So let's cue that song up and take this time to write those things down, and then I'll explain what we're going to do from there. All right. So I like that song. So I would imagine the fact if that a woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years knew this song, she might have sung it, but maybe. But that's a leap of faith, right? Yeah. All right, so we're going to take communion. We have the ushers go ahead and come forward and do that. What I want to explain to you about your name tags is this, and this is when we get down to kind of prayer ministry stuff. Go ahead and you can get the band come on up, stuff. If you put those stickers on your chest and you think to yourself, this is something that I struggle with, and this is not something that I feel like Jesus, that I feel like I haven't been healed from yet, we'd like to pray with you. Or if you feel like, I've reached out and I've had an encounter with Jesus, but it still bothers me from day to day, love to pray with you about that as well. I would encourage you as you take communion and you come to this place to approach, to receive the sacrifice, the love that Jesus has poured out for us, that you would reflect on the fact that this is who I am, that I am the child of a one true King, that he has spoken words of your life to say, daughter, son, child, brother, friend, you are healed from your affliction. So let's stand.